Right. All right, hello everybody. This is Peter, and I'm here today with Rachel, and we're going to start with our series of podcasts for the April newsletter that are going to really rehash some stories of people who have helped contribute to accomplishing, hopefully, all four of our key objectives for Q1. I'm here with Rachel to discuss one of our key objectives, which was the objective of certifying or promoting 5 people within the department. And as many of you know, and if not, you have now found out through reading the newsletter that Rachel has been certified to senior analyst. So congratulations, and want to talk a little bit about going through that process to certifying to senior analyst and just hearing a little bit about the experiences that Rachel has had that have allowed her to achieve the success, and hopefully each one of you can take from those and maybe apply them within your own career. So Rachel, welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to start by talking a little bit about your background, because I think you have a pretty unique background. And so maybe let's start with where you went to school and what you studied.
So yeah, I went to Eastern Connecticut State University, and I studied environmental earth science with a concentration in sustainability.
Very cool. And I understand that at your time there, you sort of also knew a few of our colleagues here at Sightlines, and in particular were president and vice president of a certain club. So tell us a little bit about that and what it was like working with at least Cody in the environmental club.
Yeah, so all 4 years I was at Eastern, I was a part of the environmental club on campus, and so was Cody. That's how I met him, and we ended up running the club. We organized a bunch of different events, cleanups, recycling on Sunday mornings. It was a good time.
Was Cody more like our current president or our former president?
I would have to say like our former president.
Okay, thank goodness. Thanks, good, thank goodness. Very neat. Now, so you had a focus in environmental science and sustainability, and then you took that experience and went on after college to working for a company called Groundwater and Environmental Services, which we were joking earlier is a very creatively named company. But I think people would be really interested to hear a little bit about what you did for them, and we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So right out of school, I got a job offer with this company where I was doing about 85% of my time in the field. Field work for an environmental professional. It involves air quality monitoring, groundwater monitoring, soil testing. And then eventually, as I moved up, I was doing more of the construction oversight, drilling and putting in gas tanks, taking tanks out, and overseeing health and safety on site.
It must have been a pretty challenging experience or challenging job for you, just given that you were, 21, and you were responsible for telling much older people on construction sites what to do and what was going on. How did you overcome that, or how did you deal with that?
So yeah, that definitely was challenging, and it forced me out of my comfort zone. And when somebody is doing something on a construction site, it can not only impact their lives, it can impact everybody on the site. So it was really important to make my voice heard and make sure that people are doing things safely and everybody's going home at the end of the day. You hear horror stories all the time about catastrophes that happen on construction sites with, health and safety standpoints. And, that was one of the biggest concerns going out into site and making sure everybody's able to go home at the end of the day.
In addition to that, you were telling me a little bit about collecting different samples, whether it be water, air quality, soil, getting those analyzed, and then providing reports. Tell us a little bit about how that process worked and some of the information that you had to look at, and then what were some of the reports that you had to give?
Yeah, so when you take the samples, you get a report back about 2 weeks later, and my job was to analyze the data and ensure that either the criteria is under Connecticut standards, making to ensure people's drinking water is safe to drink, or the soil is no longer giving off chemicals that are going to impact air quality, etc. So analyzing large sets of data from, I could have sampled 100 wells in a week, and analyzing that data report to ensure all of those wells have all of the criteria we sampled for are under standards or how much above, and then reporting that in a document that is then given to the state and approved by the DEP.
So we've got a bunch of files at the state with your name on them. It's like,
yeah, I mean, signed underneath the LEP.
There you go. Very cool. I'd like to hear a little bit. So you did that for 2 years?
Yep,
yeah.
2 years.
So for 2 years, and then transitioned to work here at Sightline. So I think there's probably some obvious skills that you gained in that time that you could apply here directly at Sightlines. And it sounds like maybe some in data analysis and reporting, and then some in actually being in the field. So I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the major things I think I've taken from my time at GES was, being out on construction sites and having those conversations with the other people in the field. So, there's not much difference between one of the construction workers that I was working with there and a facilities person in a boiler room. It's the same type of personality. So having those skills to be able to relate to them has helped.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's just like being comfortable in those situations is really beneficial and can be a hurdle, I think, for some new analysts coming in. Any advice on just like ways to approach that, or?
Have some fun, laugh a little bit. They're people, like, they joke, make light of the situation if possible.
Yeah.
Has helped.
Having fun is usually always a good start, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, so how did you use your experience with doing some of the data analysis from the reports? Anything skills specifically there that you've kind of utilized here at Sightlines?
Yeah, so I've always been a pretty numbers-oriented individual. I'm mostly blue analytical. So just looking at large numbers of large data sets and creating a big picture out of it. So you get a lab report, and there's probably 50 different things you're testing for, and you have to basically create a story for our client at the GES, and that story revolves around different things than they do here at Sightlines, but it's on the same track of taking the data, figuring out what it's saying, and reporting that to show your point.
Yeah, I think that's a really it's such a important point to always be reiterating, which is like data by itself is just data. It's just numbers. It's not helpful. But why we exist and why why the groundwater GES existed was to take data, which is just numbers, and translate it into something that actually tells you something, gives you information.
Exactly. Like if you gave a lab report from the lab to a homeowner and it just expected them to understand what was in their water, they would never understand that. So It was my job to put that in a report format to have them be able to understand what they're ingesting, what they're having in their water.
Yeah, great. So, I think we talked a little bit about transition. I'd love to hear, as you moved into Sightlines, what was the biggest challenge, or what was the most different thing where you're like, holy crap, this is totally different?
So everybody talks about the culture here at Sightlines and how it's so much different than everywhere else. And that to me was the biggest adjustment. I went from an office that had 0 windows, being the youngest person in the office, and with a bunch of engineers and geologists, to a relatively young company with people my own age, laughing, ton of windows, glass everything. It's huge difference.
Yeah.
And it took a little bit of time and a little bit of adjustment, but I think it's definitely a great adjustment.
Yeah. You were saying earlier, like a little bit of it was like almost, is it fair to say like relaxing your work style a little? Like,
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. Cool. As we were talking before we started, one of the things you mentioned is that you kind of have a unique approach before you step foot on campus. I think it's such a cool thing and a valuable one. So I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I go on campus, I like to have a little cheat sheet of maybe 3 to 5 questions that I ask myself before I go on campus. Just to help myself remember like major key concepts of the campus and their story. Some examples would be like top 3 capital projects that they completed last year, or gross square foot, like how big is the campus, like res life, academic space, and maybe even the age of the buildings. Just to, I know the data and I know those questions, the answers to the questions, but just having that time, this 3 minutes to just remember, to like get the juices flowing and remember what I'm supposed to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like back to an earlier point you made, is those things also can really help with launching into some of the conversations in the boiler room, because you can reference projects and things like that. And I think strengthen that. You had an interesting story that prompted this about a board meeting, and I think all of us can relate to it. So could you share that?
Yeah. So we were giving a board presentation to our Bridgewater, and Gail was presenting, and we blanked on a res hall name, and I truly could not even think of my name at the point. And those 2 seconds felt like about an hour. So after that experience, I was like, nope, I need to make this list of questions and ask myself these questions before I go on site, because I do not want that to happen again.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, I know I've looked at the building name about 3,000 times, and I can't pull it right now. And I think we all have been there in different things. So it's interesting. So now you're a senior analyst, and obviously in that position will continue to take on increasing responsibilities in your projects and strive to do different types of projects, things like that. But what else? What are some other areas that you're looking to try and get some greater experience in?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in sustainability, and I'd love to see where that can take me here at Sightlines. Right now, I'm focusing on a training for offsets versus RECs, and it's been interesting to learn a little bit more about something that I just truly didn't even know existed.
Why don't you give us the 2-sentence difference, so you can kind of preview what you're researching?
Yeah, so RECs only relate to renewable energy, so solar, wind, geothermal, and offsets and RECs only reduce your scope 2 emissions, but offsets can reduce your scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. They can be applied to any of the scopes. And an example of offsets would be like composting on campus or having a no-mow zone.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit, why is this concept going to be increasingly important in the future?
So yeah, as our schools become closer to reaching their goals of being zero emissions, they're going to get to a point where they're no longer able to mitigate or decrease the amount of emissions that they're producing, and they're going to have to offset. It's just how it's going to be. They're not going to be able to have zero emissions, especially with the infrastructure we have today on most campuses. Yeah. They're just not built for that. So we're going to have to either purchase RECs or purchase offsets to make up the remainder.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think it's so interesting that we're probably not in the near future going to be to a point where we can go to a true zero emission setup. So for campuses to achieve these goals, these RECs and offsets are going to become increasingly important. Maybe while we close out, a little bit of a lightning round and maybe just share a quick answer. And if you want to expand on it a little bit, that's cool. So first one, this is the one she laughed at me when I first asked it or told her I was going to ask it, but favorite Excel formula?
Index match.
Index match. And tell me why. What? Because this is one of my favorites too. I just think it's a very useful one.
It is super useful. It saves a ton of time, and I was super reluctant to use it at first because I had never used it.
Yeah.
But using it now, I use it in almost every template.
Have you ever used VLOOKUPs?
I've tried.
You know, so when I first started, we were VLOOKUPs. That's how you did looking up. And then, you know, there's a lot of nuance with VLOOKUPs. It's not quite it. Index match is so much better. So this goes out. You've heard it from Rachel. If you need to look up data, don't use a VLOOKUP, use an index match. Second one, given your interest in geology, do you have a favorite rock or mineral?
Don't really have a favorite rock, but if I had to pick a mineral, it would be emerald.
Emerald, nice.
Color green.
Very nice. And then tell us a little bit about maybe one of your hobbies.
Yeah, so on weekends I like to try different hiking spots around the state.
And your favorite hiking spot in Southern Connecticut is?
Probably Sleeping Giant.
Very cool. The aptly named, if you're ever driving down, I think it would be 34 into New Haven. You can see it off to the side, and it looks like a giant sleeping on its back with its big belly. So great. Last question that I want to ask, or last kind of thing I'd like to hear from you is if you had one piece of advice for an analyst or a new analyst joining Sightlines to be successful here, what would that be?
Ask for feedback, take that feedback and internalize it, make notes of it, and try to make changes to better yourself and better your work that you're producing.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And congratulations on becoming
Thanks.
a senior analyst. And I think I speak for everyone. We're excited to see what you accomplish as a senior analyst.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great.